So preparing for this meeting, I looked very quickly into the situation of the Ukrainian labor struggle, and what really seemed to have captured both Ukrainian and European media, to the point of even arriving to the rather isolated Italy, isolated in terms of listening to Ukrainian voices. And what always comes up is, and I'm sorry for the change of topic, but you are going to leave, and I thought that was a better question for you. What comes out a lot is the Kriviri struggle. So the miners and the metallurgic workers, and the reason is, for what I've understood, is the sheer size of that industrial pole, which then brings an extensive group of miners and workers with a class conscience and with the need and the will to fight for their rights, to fight for their wages that after the first war in 2013 had been axed, etc., etc. And I know you organized, you were part of the organizing in the struggle. I was wondering if you wanted to share more, and then in case you want to talk about it, given that you also mentioned the way in which trade unions had been shut down in Donetsk, etc., I remember reading about the workers, the mine workers, next to their strike, also manifesting pro-unity in 2013. And this was something that was very confusing for the Italian, let's say, Stalinist left, which couldn't understand how it was possible that the workers would not want to be absorbed by Russia. So yeah, any perspective of any of these topics from you is welcome.
What years in Kryvyi Rih protests you are talking about? So every year.
I know that the peak of the struggle was, if I understood correctly, 2017, 2016, 2018. And that is what I was more curious about. Then, to my understanding, however, that was just a peak. There was demonstrations in 2020 with the miners closing themselves in the mines. And I know there was also something earlier on, even if the conditions were slightly better before the Russian invasion in 2014. But yeah, start from 2017-19.
Okay, I can tell a little bit about our experience of their support. Our activists from our organization, some of them are economists, and they took part in big research of tax avoidance, shifting of profits in iron ore mining. It's one of biggest export-oriented sector in Ukraine, and they told that for some 10 years the number of tax avoidance in iron ore mining were so huge for Ukraine, for different producers of iron ore. So if this profit shifting will not be present, we could not take any foreign credits from IMF, World Bank, and so on and so on and so on. And they shown it with numbers, and they presented in several cities. And one of the most grateful target groups, it were trade unions of iron ore miners. and they started to invite our activists to their collective bargaining, to discussions with their management about any opportunities to raise their salaries. And because we also put it on the agenda that time that the salaries which some like concrete transnational corporations, we talked at that time about ArcelorMittal, they paid the less salary which they pay in every war in all the world. They paid the less in Ukraine. And we talked to iron ore miners of Arcelor that in Kazakhstan, in other closest countries of the region, post-Soviet countries and Western Europe and Eastern Europe and South Africa, they paid less in Ukraine, and the labor is the same, so productivity is the same, so no capitalist arguments about different type of operations, different type of labor, and some kind of international investments which will come and help us all. And these arguments don't work, never worked in this point. And trade unionists put this on agenda. We helped them to take part in negotiation. We argumented that rising of their salaries will save our economy from losing of money from the budget, because if they will earn more, less money will be go to the tax havens. And they took it seriously, and we helped them to make some agitation in this direction. And so in 2017 was protest on this topic, in 2018 was protest on this topic, in 2019 was protest in this topic in different companies. So like miners share this information between themselves, and they demanded to get salaries from 1,000 of euro. So at the moment they had less than 800 euros. And they demand 1,000 euro minimum for people who work in this in iron ore mines, and it's part of our demands too, to raise salaries for those people who working for in export. It will protect. It will make a sense for country to have this export, and it will help to avoid of tax avoidance on the export-oriented sectors. It's a little bit about this.
Mm. Thank you. I think Vladislav wanted to chime in.
Yeah, because it's a huge topic. It's too hard to say everything about this. But also, on contrary to something that Artem said, I remember I was chatting with British economist Rukh, who was on a research mission, and German companies were saying to him that they want strong collective agreements in Ukraine. And Ukraine, with their too liberal labor reforms, cannot provide them enough stability, and just arguing that Ukraine should be a social state, so the business would feel more safer investing there. So approach is really based from country to country, and as probably you heard recently, there was a strong legislative push by the European Union to establish some kind of quality control for the international companies. There was a law produced by socialists and Democrats group in European Parliament about that they won't deal with companies that use child labor anywhere in the world. So that kind of regulation could be really helpful in terms of Ukraine. So if some European left wing would push legislation that say, for example, that they won't cooperate with the companies that put standards lower than European Ukraine. And also at the same time to subsidize and help companies who are taking the risk to invest in very unstable Ukrainian economy. It's something that could be very easily done by European Union. They have legislative power and experience to do so. So that's about the companies. And yeah, actually, discussion about reconstructions, it's really a depressing one because Ukraine just develops backwards, while European Union, while even International Monetary Fund says that we were wrong on our neoliberal policies. Ukraine says that they were wrong not to go too far enough. They're saying that Europe is too socialist for Ukrainians who are too entrepreneurial in their spirit and so on and so on and so on. So that's the current discourse that is dominant in economic sphere of Ukraine. And it's absolutely horrendous. And we are in this part trying to, well, I would give you a second of, I don't know, Italian patriotism and Italian pride, because we really use a lot of works about from Mariano Mazzucato to push this idea of the state needs to go in the reconstruction to fund the most needed infrastructural projects, housing, and so on, invest in Ukrainian business, invest in Ukrainian market as like state with guided principles and missions to achieve some social reconstruction. And when we throw such theses, it gains some traction. It gains some traction with economic intellectuals and so on and so on. And we are trying to be that kind of like discursive but also lobbying organization. And we are throwing this topic like somewhere. We had a lecture in Kiev School of Economics where all of these neoliberal economists study and teaching about that with this precise angle. So we need like entrepreneurial states that will engage to create, to shape the market to social needs, to progressive needs and so on, about social market economy, progressive taxation. And such topics, they have some influence, I would say. But the problem also that this influence doesn't go up. It stays somewhere in the middle. And together with this, it's not realistic from our side to achieve that, like to achieve that vision of social reconstruction of Ukraine and so on and so on. So we are diversifying our forces and do more like point campaigns centered around, for example, Alena Lasheva can talk about housing, and we are just putting all our forces to speak about housing, and we succeed and we can succeed in such like small points and so on and so on. But the bigger picture, it's harder. We are fighting for some kind of social reconstruction. We are speaking of the need of we also use a lot of fancy words like entrepreneurial state. We also use lovely word polyarchic state, which means the state that gives some power to local communities, trade unions, and civil society and economic decisions. So in that sense, we are rephrasing such phrases as workers' control in such ways that we can go and like speak with some people who are close to ministers and or in like universities, and to have people like think, that could be working. So we are doing this work, but it looks rather depressing, and a lot really depends on the Western powers. And in the West, we have three scenarios, I would say. First, it's like doom scenario, we are done. It's if in the next elections Trump wins in US. It just would be catastrophe for everything, for everyone, and in military terms, in economical terms, and so on. But also there are two other scenarios, and Western powers, especially US, now does like this, like small-scale interference to protect social rights in Ukraine. And European Union tries to do something the same, but on less scale with their grants. okay, not with grants. US does grants. European Union does credits on like some social conditions, trying to not to conflict with Ukrainian government, but to push at least some reasonable approaches. For example, like a week ago, actually, International Monetary Fund forced Ukraine to abandon its tax relief for business, because they said if you will have such relaxed taxation policies in the war, you couldn't finance anything, you will just collapse. And so they forced Ukraine to raise the taxation for 3% higher than it was pushed by our parliament. So there are a lot of points of influence by the Western powers, where the left also can influence their governments, so their governments influence Ukraine to adopt these decisions. So that's also one of the a lot of factors that comes into reconstruction of Ukraine.
Thank you. I would like to follow up on that, but first Artem wanted to reply to you.
Yeah, maybe not reply to Vladislav, but to add on actually mentioned question by you about de-communization processes. I can say that to be a socialist, you're not obliged to make tattoo of sickle and hammer on your face. To talk to workers about their rights, you also not have to put red flag on your shoulders. And I think it's a little bit those what Vladislav mentioned about talked to people in universities and in some other people with whom we talk in sometimes. So we had this legislation adopted in, I think, somewhere around 2016 about judging of Soviet authoritarian and German Nazi authoritarian regimes. So there restricted the using of Soviet symbolics in public spaces. I don't know, maybe for us it became a reason why we start focus to work with people, not to stay people who looks like the people from the books or I don't know, comics about leftists of the past century. Yeah, so this a little bit from my side.